Weekly News, the only weekly news show where you actually learn what's happening in the world instead of a vague approximation of what's happening in the world. I'm Helen of Destroy, filling in for Kevin Barrett, who is currently traveling in an undisclosed location. And with me is Greg of the Antedote.
Hello.
And so we are here to bring you the events of the week and some insightful analysis of those events, as opposed to what you would get in a few other places that we will not be so kind to name. Anyway, so if you are interested in following False Flag Weekly News, in case we end up getting deplatformed, as seems to be going around like the plague lately, you can sign up for our email list. And that should be coming up on the screen right now, but I'm not really sure if it is because I'm not seeing anything on the screen right now. But there's a mailing list that you can sign up for. And if you're interested in supporting us, you can make a contribution. But otherwise, just get ready for some insightful analysis of the week's events. Oh, here we go. There's the email address. So yeah, you can send an email, and wherever we end up, as you may know, YouTube has been deleting people who are very outspoken about certain political topics, and so we might end up on that list, and you will receive an email whenever the next show is up. Okay, so our first story of the day is Pompeo blaming this latest attack on a few tankers in the Gulf of Oman on the Iranians, because who else would it be? You know, obviously, that's even what he said. We don't know of anybody else it could possibly be. Only the Iranians have the capacity to carry out an attack like this. We don't know of any proxy groups that have the capacity to carry out. The skill that was required is certainly something only the Iranians could do. And just basically coming out immediately after the attack, no investigation necessary. It was the Iranians, game over. Done. We better go kill those guys. So what do you think about this?
Oh, I totally agree with you, Helen. This is classic. For those who are kind of familiar with the more controversial elements of history as far as the nature of false flag terrorism goes, this fits that classic mold of it to an absolute T, and we're seeing the same strategy play out that's plays out continuously throughout our history, at least throughout the last 100 years or so. And this, once again, is another classic example of that. Is Mr. Apple in the mouth Pompeo, as you've coined him, is out there making these statements as usual. And obviously, when you refer to proxy groups, you're referring to something like the Mujahideen al-Haq, which many people within the Trump inner circle have very good relationships with. So once again, this fits the mold, but it is interesting to see some pushback within even, traditional establishment media outlets that do not seem to be very high on this idea of carrying out some type of event that will lead to a possible catastrophic conflict with Iran.
Yeah, I noticed that CNN and Bloomberg both had sort of articles saying, well, it doesn't look like Iran would actually benefit from this in any way. And it's like, when you've lost CNN and Bloomberg, then you really lost it as far as like being propaganda capable. And that's one thing you have to admire the Trump regime in sort of a backhanded way, in that they've deleted the last shreds of credibility from this sort of Gulf of Tonkin, 9/11, casus belli sort of a way of doing things. That these kind of explanations no longer work anymore, and people are quite skeptical because, for one thing, it's so obvious. I mean, Shinzo Abe is there in Tehran talking about maybe we need to de-escalate this whole conflict thing a little bit, and then whoops, the ship goes up in flames. I mean, you can't choreograph a better false flag, and it's like they've gone mad with the power, and they're no longer even trying to make these things believable. It's pretty embarrassing. Yeah, Iran, of course, calls it suspicious because it is. It's only the most suspicious one of these things you've ever seen. I mean, I've referred to in one of my articles recently as the Mossad of Psychic Friends Network, because it's always like Israeli intelligence says, something terrible is going to happen. It's going to be an Iranian attack, and it's going to happen here and here, and it's going to involve rockets, or it's going to involve whatever. And of course, this one's already fallen apart. I mean, it looks like we didn't get the story in soon enough, but there was one that came out late last night about also Iran rescued the sailors. So of course, they're going to attack the ship, and then they're going to come in and rescue the sailors. That's a really smart thing to do. But one of the guys on the Japanese ship said, we saw something come out of the air. And Pompeo just said, it was a torpedo, and if only Iran could do this torpedo attack. So what is this, one of those mysterious Iranian flying torpedoes? I
I
mean,
guess so. I guess so. And it's interesting. I don't know the details of this, the nature of this, but it's interesting that Japan is playing a key role in whatever's going on here, I guess, by the nature of this meeting that was going on while this event took place. But Japan is key to whatever the Trump administration's goals and aims are regarding China and Southeast Asia. I don't know how that plays into this particular deal here with Iran, but it plays into a bigger global geopolitical perspective. I'm not sure in what way, but it is interesting that Japan is directly involved in this. So.
yeah, also they're one of the ones who's being hardest hit by the sanctions on Iranian oil because apparently they were a big purchaser of Iranian oil. So yeah, it's definitely they're a key role in this. I don't like you said they're very much involved from a number of angles. Also the China thing, which of course, yeah, Trump's latest thing is now tariffs. So it's tariffs are going to be on everybody, and tariffs on China, tariffs on Mexico, tariffs on anybody who comes along and just shows a little too much of an independent streak. But yeah, it's just another suspicious attack and a long string of suspicious attacks. And Pompeo even says, well, yeah, the proof that we have is well, it's part of a pattern of other attacks that also have no proof. And so it's like you can build on a very shaky foundation. You can only build your tower so high before it just crashes down and people just start pointing and laughing at you, which I think is starting to happen. Like I said, CNN is expressing suspicion about this, and it's not just Javad Zarif who's saying, this is a little dodgy, but yeah.
To some people, CNN expressing doubt on something like this would be proof that Trump's doing the right thing here, but I wouldn't go that far. And also, one more thing: tariffs have now joined sanctions. It seems like in the Trump milieu as a way of punishing the so-called enemies of the U.S. without actually bringing accountability to the people who Trump ostensibly was going to go after when he was running for president, which is the big banks and all that. So.
Oh yeah, no, he's done a total about face on all that. I mean, whatever happened to? Oh yeah, we need to get out of the Middle East. Now it's like, oh yeah, by getting out of the Middle East, I meant start more wars and kill more civilians, and yeah, let's delegate control to the military. I mean, they know what they're doing. They can press a red button.
Let's
Yeah.
let's just put our agenda even further in line with the psychotic hardcore Zionist aims than it was before. So.
Yeah, Israel doesn't have enough money of ours that they can then use to spy on us.
For sure.
But all right. Well, what's the next story? Oh, Hong Kong protests. Yeah, this one was interesting because, of course, we are always trying to back some sort of opposition in China as far as, I mean, the usual color revolution techniques don't necessarily work so well because the Chinese have a pretty strong grasp on their media and their population in general. But this was interesting because obviously Hong Kong is a separate entity. And I'm sure that a lot of people who end up there are doing so because they do not want to be extradited to China. So I didn't really know what to think about this protest because it is being heavily covered in the Western media, which can be a sign that there's something a little fishy there, especially, I mean, that's sort of the centerpiece of a Gene Sharp color revolution is that you've got the Western media is very much interested in you doing these things that are very theatrical in effect. But it's also, I mean, obviously the people in Hong Kong who are going to be extradited to China are in a very bad situation. And I certainly wouldn't want to be extradited to China if I had done something to run afoul of their government. But anyway, what did you think about this?
It's very interesting, and I don't even want to comment on the nature and the specifics of what's going on in terms of on the ground in a place like China or a place like Hong Kong, because I honestly don't know. It is interesting how like much of like kind of the Soros Foundation, quote unquote, left media is very critical of China from a human rights perspective, supportive of these color revolution type scenarios, while you've also got this far right that's kind of around Trump that is very much pushing the idea of this trade war and a tariff war against China that is at the forefront of Trump's agenda. But also right in the background of this is you've got this Chinese relationship with Israel and also with so much of the American right wing that is so around Trump that it's very interesting. And I think from a longer term perspective of kind of looking at how the basically China was built up under Mao. Mao came to power with the help of elements of the West. And then after Nixon opened up China with the primary role of Henry Kissinger involved in that, it seems that at some level, the West and the usual suspects have had a role in propping up China as an economic power while also creating this enemy, very much a Soviet style enemy of like the real hard right-wing foreign policy elites with that are surrounding Trump. So it is interesting. And so also, at some point, people are going to have to stop ignoring this China-Israel relationship, which is becoming more obvious by the day. So,
yeah, no, I think it's pretty clear that Israel is setting China up as being the next logical ally when the U.S. has been completely sucked dry and is now just a big husk that's completely bankrupted and no longer functional. Then Israel is just going to cozy up to China, and they're the next host for the ever-revolving parasite. And so, yeah, I mean, the relationship has already been, the foundation for the relationship has already been constructed, and it's just being built on, and they're playing both sides of the equation right now. But yeah, no, it's China is very much a power to be reckoned with. It also is a very useful boogeyman for the Trump administration to basically hold up when they can't hold up Russia, because it's weird. There's this sort of like schizophrenic thing that Trump has with Russia, because he knows he can't look too like he's being too nice to it because of the whole Russiagate thing, but he also doesn't want to be like a huge scumbag to it because like the whole nuclear weapons thing. But I mean, this is everybody's got nukes these days. It's not it's such an exclusive club anymore.
Yeah, we'll talk about Russia in a little bit for sure, but yeah, I agree.
Yeah. All right, let's see what's next. Oh, this one is ooh. So Pompeo decided in a, you know, he knows he shouldn't be saying this. It even said, "Oh, I hope that none of you guys got a camera out." Lol. It said, yeah, he's going to push back against if Corbyn gets elected as prime minister in Britain, because, you know, he's such a raging anti-Semite. I feel bad for Jeremy Corbyn, but also he did kind of do a stupid thing. Like when he was originally being accused of anti-Semitism for the unthinkable crime of suggesting that the Palestinian people should maybe have a state, he basically completely collapsed himself and said, "Oh, I'm so sorry that I ever said these horrible, horrible things." And he's just been apologizing since then. So, I mean, it is kind of, he brought this on himself. You can't start apologizing for things you didn't do, or else you'll end up spending the rest of your life apologizing. And so I always tell people, if they're being attacked for unjustified accusations of anti-Semitism, don't be a Jeremy Corbyn. But back to this, Pompeo, of course, by saying that, oh, well, we can't even let him get in power because then it will be too late. So it's like you're basically saying that you are going to interfere with a foreign nation who's supposed to be your like bestest ally in the whole world, the UK, our special relationship with the UK. And you're saying that you're not going to let this guy get in power because, oh, he's such a raging anti-Semite. It's like Jeremy Corbyn is such a little milk toasty guy anyway.
Yeah,
he makes his own jam. He's like the most well-mannered, like, I mean, yes, he's got some socialist principles there, but he's been a peace activist his entire life. He's really a mild-mannered fellow, and so this is a little bit ridiculous. But the fact that he's like conspiring with this Jewish organization, I forget which one it was, but and that he's just openly saying that, oh yeah, we can't let this happen, so we're gonna stop it. I mean, talk about chutzpah.
I guess Pompeo wants the great Boris Johnson to be the next prime minister.
Well, I mean, he even kind of looks like Trump. He'd be very comfortable with the whole Pompeo-Trump situation.
I agree with that for sure.
Oh, and this one, yeah, the $1 million troll army, act.il, everybody's favorite hasbara troll organization. I've been on the receiving end of their machinations, and you probably have as well. Basically, if you've been online talking not talking realistically about Israel, you've probably been on the receiving end of act.il trolls. Basically, they get this, as this article pointed out, they got their hands on some financial records of this group and showed that they get more than $1 million to basically just troll and interject themselves into any online discussion of Israel, and just kind of try to sway the whole thing in their direction. And it's unfortunate because the Ministry of Strategic Affairs, Israel's Ministry of Strategic Affairs, that funds this or this group, organization, whatever, they get their money from the United States. So it's like, I mean, we fund them to combat BDS, boycott, divestment, and sanctions. And then they give that money to this group here. And then that group goes and trolls the US. So it's like this perfect circle of trolling. And there was another story, which unfortunately didn't make it into our rotation, where there's a similar thing going on with like Iranian disinformation. Like both the Mushaherini Calc and this Iran disinfo group that have basically been trolling Americans on behalf of Iranian regime change interests, and that this is all funded by the taxpayers. So it's like, really, you're just, the American taxpayers are funding the trolling of themselves, and it's absurd, and this needs to be stopped.
Yeah, it's a classic hasbara, and it's interesting that now you're seeing between this kind of expose and also electronic intifada, and there's all kinds of issues with Ali Abu Nima as far as the role he's played over the years in helping silence legitimate, I think, activists that are coming from a pro-Palestinian perspective. For all of that, I mean, this as well, articles like this, as well as the Lobby documentary, what we're going to talk about later with this Whitney Webb Mint Press News article. I mean, the mask is really beginning to come off. And what's interesting about it is it's not at all coming from Trump, who was supposed to be the enemy of the Zionist power structure, according to so many people that are supporting him, but it's coming from the opposition to Trump. And so, I mean, for all the flaws that are there with kind of the left Palestinian BDS activism in its current form, with a lot of censorship that goes on within those circles, I mean, there is some very effective exposing of just how these propaganda networks are working as far as to curry up favor of Israel in just about every manner possible in terms of propaganda.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not really familiar with what Ali Abu Nima has been doing as far as censoring legitimate the opposition and stuff. But okay, but and anyway, I think that Electronic Intifada does great work as far as exposing these trolling operations and just hasbara in general. Like they were the ones who exposed that Wikipedia campaign way back. Yeah. In the early days when people were just first learning what hasbara even was. Right. And they pulled the curtain up on a lot of stuff, and I appreciate their work as far as leaking the lobby and all of that, because I mean that documentary is basically, if you want to know what's going on, what your tax dollars are being spent on, that's the one to watch for sure.
Electronic Intifada and Mondo Weiss have done yeoman's work, and also you won't find better sources of the actual on the ground specifics of what is being done to the Palestinian people from an actual on the ground perspective as well. So
yeah, and just exposing how poorly the media does in reporting this stuff. I mean, just showing the way that they use words, like the way that they use the passive voice, like X number of Palestinians were killed, or there were clashes. And I mean, they were the I think, to my knowledge, at least, Mondo Weiss was one of the first ones to point that out. Okay, let's see the next story. Oh, here we have George Galloway talking about Pompeo and his oh, no, this is, okay. Did I skip the Russian one? Oh, no, I didn't skip the Russian one. Mm-hmm. No, I skipped the Russian one. Okay, so this journalist here who was wrongly imprisoned on drug charges, and the media leaps to his defense when, yes, the media should leap to his defense. He was wrongly imprisoned, and it's no good that these journalists can be railroaded for unjust accusations. But as this writer pointed out, I mean, where were these people when Julian Assange was getting locked up? But fortunately, this guy is out of jail, and the Russian media, very much RT, who I work for, was right there on the front line saying, "What, we need some answers right now. Why is this guy locked up? What's going on here?" And hopefully they'll get some answers. I mean, it's just people act like Russia is one monolithic thing, and that it's still like the Soviet Union, and they still have a very strict view of how the press works and stuff. And it's really not like that at all. I mean, there is a free press in Russia. RT is allowed to. I mean, I wouldn't go to RT for like the nitty gritty of like Putin's individual wrongdoings, but in the same way, I wouldn't go to American media for like the truth about what's going on in the US. So I think. Sorry, go ahead.
No, that's a fair point.
Yeah, no, this guy, I'm not really familiar with his work, but obviously he pissed somebody off, and so the corrupt police departments, they exist around the world, and they exist in Russia, and it's not like Putin has his individual ability to control. Russia's a huge country. He doesn't know what one little tiny thing is doing. So I mean, the fact that this was then held up as, look, see, Russia doesn't have a free press. Russia presses journalists, right. And that was like literally the narrative, when it's like all of the journalists, all the front pages of all the newspapers said, let this guy out. What's going on here? This is an outrage. So I mean, yeah, Russia actually does have kind of a free press.
Yeah, I'd like to think the truth is somewhere in the middle, but I mean, you get the far extremes, and then you can't really make sense of reality. So.
Yeah, unfortunately, people just have an ability to, or an inability rather, to question what they read, and whoever gets their narrative in there first, for some reason, is just it's very difficult to dislodge, especially when they have this carry this authoritative. I mean, yeah, the U.S. media is in a really terrible state right now with the whole attempting to be authoritative, yet getting shown up again and again to be lying about basically everything. I mean, I think that's why, probably one of the reasons why they have been reluctant to jump on board this latest false flag thing in the Gulf, because they've just been proven wrong so many times that they realize their credibility can't take too many more hits. Their ratings are in the toilet. And there's not really much they can do to gain their credibility back except start telling the truth. I mean, I don't know, unless they just, deplatform the entire internet, which I think might be our next story. Hold on. Oh, not quite. We have Florida's governor is. Oh, you skipped Florida's governor. Or did you? Wait, never mind. You didn't skip Florida's governor. That is our next story. Sorry. This is my first time hosting the show, and it's pretty obvious. But anyway, so YouTube is apparently radicalizing everyone, and the downfall of Western civilization is soon to occur thanks to YouTube. That bad YouTube. New York Times clearly doesn't like competition, and this story was such a joke. I mean, there was an interview with the guy, and he's like talking about how he was radicalized by they kept showing him these videos of Stefan Molyneux, that Nazi Stefan Molyneux, who is really annoying, but he's not like a Nazi, and being radicalized by Stefan Molyneux is like being radicalized by a wet sock or something. It's like it doesn't compute. And so he even said that he wasn't like exactly radicalized, like he didn't really go like hard right or hard anything. And the fact that if we're going to listen to him, then YouTube actually saved him from being radicalized, because in addition to showing him these right-wing videos, it started showing him these left-wing videos that he decided eventually were like the right way to go. So if we're going to listen to his narrative, then this story is complete BS, because like YouTube's algorithm showed him the nice, like kinder, gentler, whatever, liberal alternative to his like Stefan Molyneux apocalypse there. And this is just so silly that this is like held up as, and this was right, of course, on the heels of the Vox adpocalypse, which was when, supposedly they blamed it on this like altercation between Steven Crowder and Carlos Maza, this Vox journalist who took offense at Crowder's pointed jabs at his sexual orientation, which, I mean, that wasn't really the central thing. I mean, the ADL claimed responsibility for this whole kerfuffle. They put out it's like a terrorist group claiming responsibility for a terror act. The ADL puts out its statement saying, well, we helped YouTube design this crackdown and this complete annihilation of free speech, so we're going to sign our name to this. I mean, they're basically admitting they're terrorists. But what did you think about this?
This story, to me, it just seems made up. I mean, this is just too good to be true. This is the story of someone who goes from having traditional kind of liberal beliefs to being radicalized by the alt-right or the alt-light, whatever you want to call it, the intellectual dark web. And by the way, all of these people are Zionist propagandists to the core that are mentioned in this article, and they're the ones that are radicalizing him. It's like YouTube wants to, the narrative wants to put up these people as like the faces of hate and the reason why the internet needs to be controlled, when in reality, number one, these people are creations of the same establishment, of the same apparatus that is now allegedly trying to destroy them in the name of protecting people's feelings from being hurt or whatever. But I mean, also these people are provocative in a manner that is designed to make people turn against you. And it's in a way where it's just pushing all of this, culture stuff, pushing all this us versus them, you're the enemy, no, you're the enemy mentality and mindset. And so for this guy, this story seems a little too good to be true. It wouldn't surprise me if this is just a totally manufactured person who just happens to say everything that like a media outlet that has a vested interest in trying to stop certain information from coming out, or at least putting on the facade of holding up these, what I believe are Zionist provocateurs on the right, using them as an excuse to crack down on legitimate dissent. And, I mean, this guy is saying everything that you would want that narrative to push. So I think it's a little too good to be true. It wouldn't surprise me if this isn't even a real person. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, it's like he did come out of nowhere for one thing, and also like he's now trying to
I guess he
sell
has a
his
channel.
identity as, yeah, he's got his own channel now, and he's trying to sell his identity as like, oh well, I've been there and I can help you like not not make the same mistakes as I did. When it's like, I mean, his whole thing was just so mild, and he doesn't even fit into the narrative that they've projected on him. So unless he does come out and say, oh well, you know, New York Times kind of like used me in this way that's incorrect, then yeah, I mean, he's a construct basically. But I did also think that it was interesting that New York Times had this thing on the front page, and then I don't know if it was in the same issue, but somebody on UNS pointed this out. They had something else about how YouTube is saving Russian dissidents, that they can now go and disagree with the government on YouTube. So it's like dissidence is okay in Russia, but it's not okay here because radicalization. I don't know. But yeah, no, it's and what you said about that many of the people that are supposedly being deplatformed are the Zionist propagandists. It's like, yeah, they hold up a few Zionist propagandists like Laura Loomer or whatever, and then instead it's like all of the people who are actually criticizing Israel who are getting deplatformed and demonetized and stuff, like Ryan Dawson and Adam Green, and yeah, all these people who are losing their channels and losing their super chats and stuff. And it's like, okay, so you have to have like a beard of a few Zionist propagandists like Alex Jones, and then underneath that you have like everybody who's putting up really good, solid reporting about the truth about what's going on in the world, and we can't have any of that.
It's a combination of obvious Zionist propagandists like the four people listed here, as well as people who are just really like have a real obsession with pushing issues related to race and all this. And it kind of goes hand in glove together. The kind of people that will just automatically turn you off by just being overly provocative in a manner, of very much a divisive manner when it comes to things like race and identity or even religion, things of that nature, that are just really all into these social cultural wars, which kind of works together kind of in a strange way with this current network here of like open pro-Israel, pro-Zionist types that are obviously pushing an agenda. But it's also very interesting that these people, where was YouTube and these other social media platforms when these people were helping Trump get elected through their propaganda channels, and now they want to crack down after all the damage has been done?
Yeah, that's that too. That's the closing the barn doors when the horse is long gone. But yeah, it's very much this divide and conquer thing. Is that they try to smear certain positions. Like, I mean, I'm gonna have a hard time thinking of one position, but they smear these positions by lumping them in with a lot of like really hostile or guaranteed turn-off stuff, like this whole race IQ thing, which is kind of like, I mean, it's kind of designed to get people upset at one another and to turn races against one another, when really the best thing that we could possibly be doing is uniting everybody who is the working class, everybody who is not the billionaires, and you know, looking at who is actually oppressing us. And like, I mean, somebody did a statistical analysis of the headlines of like New York Times and mainstream media over the last few years, and they noticed that starting around 2012, from 2012 to 2015, like the incidence of terms like white privilege and diversity and things like that shot up, like in some cases 400%. And like, okay, so clearly there is being a narrative that is forced down our throat, because it's not like hate crimes have gone up or anything. I mean, for one thing, I have a problem with the term hate crime anyway, but like the FBI definition of a hate crime has not in fact gone up, whatever the ADL might say. When you've got an organization that depends for its existence on people thinking that there's lots of hate crimes going on, that organization is going to lie about the number of hate crimes. That's a simple fact that everybody can pretty much understand, I think. But yeah, if using the FBI's own statistics, hate crimes are actually down across the board for every like every minority group, every my mind is blanking on the term, but like race, ethnicity, gender, every like group that would be considered victimized by a quote unquote hate crime, it's down across the board. So why are we talking about them so much?
And one last point on this is that this whole rise of these terms like white privilege and like this real design on the idea of whiteness just ruling everything, it has also coincided with a rise in this very manufactured migration crisis, which was largely created by these unjust wars going on in the Middle East that has completely ravaged Europe and driven Europe into a state of chaos where you have the convenient boogeyman of the Muslim, brown-skinned Muslim immigrants are trying to take over. Also with group movements here in the US like Black Lives Matter, which whatever people have a lot of opinions on that, but it's at least partially rooted in a very legitimate critique of the heavy-handedness of law enforcement and techniques. So you have these movements that are all coming around at the same time that are very much designed to just divide and conquer people. And I think it's largely done by design, where it seems that all of these, you're having like the moving of politics to the far kind of more fringes to the right and the left, whereas the establishment's losing its control over things. But at the same time, what is this push to the far extremes of the various political spectrums? What is it leading us to? And I think it's leading us to a very manufactured crisis that's designed to kind of take away our rights and privileges in the name of defending whatever you want to defend. But a lot of this, I think, is very manufactured.
Yeah, I actually wrote about exactly that this is the manufactured up with a push to the extremes that's designed to engineer a crackdown on dissent, a crackdown on freedom of expression. I wrote about that in my latest piece, which you can see on helenofdestroy.com. But actually, it's also my first piece for gionjournal.com, GHION journal. End plug. Anyway, next story is the Florida's governor has just signed a bill that will censor criticism of Israel throughout the state's public schools because, Israel wasn't already protected enough under the existing laws. This is part of that whole push to redefine the word anti-Semitism to mean criticism of Israel. Now, we all know that anti-Semitism, at least in the traditional definition that has been used for decades, means bigotry against Jews. But they've changed it so that now it means criticism of Israel. And you can't just do that because calling somebody an anti-Semite is a very loaded word. You can get people fired from their jobs that way. You can get people ostracized that way. And it's because obviously being bigoted is wrong. But being critical of Israel is not wrong. And this guy is, the fact that he actually took his whole crew over to Israel there to sign this bill in a ceremonial signing ceremony is very telling because it's like, the US has already decided that it wants to be a vassal state of Israel. Fine, whatever. But do you have to rub it in our face, guys? No, it's not fine, obviously, but it's like it's adding insult to injury here with that move. And I think he's being sued by a number of people right now because of that, which is good. I hope they get him to cough up some dollars because this is obscene. Literally obscene. This is grotesque, and the fact that they're doing this in public schools. And I think. This is going around a lot as far as this trying to get this redefinition of anti-Semitism. The State Department has already adopted it. It hasn't been adopted nationwide yet, but many European nations have adopted it. And this is grotesque because you can't just redefine a word like that, especially a word that has such significance in the minds of most people.
For sure. And if you thought Pompeo was great for making memes, take Ron DeSantis and make some memes of him. Look at this guy. But with the benefit of hindsight, it was completely obvious what someone like Ron DeSantis would do. Jeremy Roth-Kushel and I on our program, The Antedote, we've very much been following the primary role that Breitbart plays in pushing a lot of this real heavy-handed Zionist propaganda. I noticed Ron DeSantis, from when he was still a congressman, he was a favorite of the Breitbart crew, which is openly Israeli propaganda as much as it gets, open Israeli propaganda as it gets, operating here in America. And DeSantis was the guy who was one of the primary congressmen pushing Trump to get the Jerusalem embassy moved. He was the primary sponsor of a bill on the Golan Heights to recognize it as belonging to Israel when he was still a congressman prior to getting elected as governor of Florida. And now there's a lot of hand-wringing from like a lot of the alt-right type of those who were critical of Jewish power from an alt-right perspective. There was a lot of hand-wringing going on, but where were they when Breitbart and these Zionist operatives were promoting DeSantis's run for governor? They were out there repeating this information that this black radical Democrat opponent of his, Andrew Gillum, was going to steal the election and let all the cop killers out of prison and stuff. So, they, whether they know it or not, they openly helped this real hardcore Zionist network surrounded around the whole Breitbart sphere get this guy elected into office. And once again, just like with Trump, the hand-wringing goes on after the damage has been done. And now this guy does something that anybody who was paying a little bit of attention could have seen he was going to do. So.
Yeah, very much so. The Breitbart, the whole Breitbart model of which basically, just as liberals have gotten this prepackaged ideology that now more and more, if you subscribe to liberalism as an ideology, you have to take it a whole. You have to take their position on gun control along with their position on Medicare for all or whatever. And now Breitbart's entire purpose was to get support for Israel inserted into that prepackaged ideology of conservatism. So now you can't just be like, oh, well, yeah, we need a Second Amendment. It's we need a Second Amendment and we need to support Israel. It's like, what
Right.
does Israel have to do with conservatism? That doesn't make any
Yeah.
sense.
Not
For
just go. You were finishing
Oh,
up.
so I was going to say that for foreign aid, you would think that conservatives would
Right.
disagree with the idea that we should be giving them billions of dollars in foreign aid per year, especially when their economy is doing so much better than ours. But yeah, what were you going to say?
But it's not just even support Israel, it's support of Israel to a much even more extreme level than what the mainstream establishment pushes here in the US. I mean, this is support of Israel in the craziest aspects of its agenda, the ones that are fitting all of the aims of these people that have this messianic apocalyptic religious view of how the world's going to come to an end. So that's what's being pushed here. And you'll notice even the propaganda coming out of this network in a lot of ways, it'll make even someone like Bill Kristol look like a dove when it comes to Israel, as scary as that sounds. But I mean, that's the reality of the situation in a
Yeah,
lot of
and like every time Ilhan Omar opens her mouth, then
ways.
there's like 5 articles about, oh, Ilhan Omar is the Antichrist and and they're just ridiculous. Like every time, or if Pompeo says something about Iran, then it's like, yeah, we have to go into Iran, and it's like, dude,
Right.
what? Wait, what? This is insane. So yeah,
Remember,
they're really off the deep end a bit,
but
and
this
it's
is what happens when you have a website that was literally conceived in
yeah,
Jerusalem,
founded in Israel.
Benjamin Netanyahu. So
Yeah, that's just peachy. Ew, ew, ew. Oh, speaking of really, really corrupt things, we have breach of ethics, leaked chats between Brazilian judge and prosecutor who imprisoned Lula reveal prohibited collaboration and doubts over evidence. You mean that the Brazilian government is corrupt? Oh my God! Oh my God! This is insane! What a revelation! No, but I mean, it's like Bolsonaro is basically like, this is a guy who openly expresses nostalgia for death squads, who
right.
thinks that clear cutting the Amazon rainforest is a really cool thing to do, who I mean, he loves him some Zionism as well. He's basically, I mean, they call him Brazil's Trump, but that's really, he's worse. He's much worse than Trump could possibly be, because he's got more power than Trump could possibly have. He's not checked by this deep state or these intelligence agencies or whatever. He can do whatever he pleases, and what he pleases has so far been stomping on dissidents and locking up his opposition. I mean, this here is basically, they put Lula in jail so he couldn't run again,
Yeah.
and so that gave Bolsonaro the presidency. And this is they leaked the chats that prove that the judge here in this case was basically helping the prosecution. And I mean, yeah, in Brazil, like in most countries, the judge is supposed to be neutral. They're not supposed to be like giving the prosecution evidence and telling the prosecution what to do and stuff. So this is insane. And of course, the conviction should be overturned. Will it? No, because I mean, I think Bolsonaro gave this guy Moro, this judge, even more power after he was elected. So it's like, unfortunately, I don't really see a way out of this. I mean, now Greenwald is being threatened. He said he's not going to back down, but he's being threatened and stuff. I just hope that whoever leaked this stuff doesn't get the usual intercept source treatment, because if his name is leaked, then he's dead. I mean, Bolsonaro will kill his ass. That's not good. This is
And yeah, without knowing the specifics of on the ground in Brazil, I mean, mainly, we have Greenwald, who I personally don't trust as one of the primary Western reporters on what's going on in Brazil. But very clearly, you can see how the very organized, it appears, takedown of someone like Lula, and also of, I believe, the another direct successor, Dilma Rousseff, how this was done to create the atmosphere to make someone like a Bolsonaro possible in Brazil. So we're seeing a repeat, it seems like, of the Cold War era, where you're having these far right wing, let's just call them for what they are, fascist dictators coming to power. And so it seems to be a repeat of the past, but in some ways it could be even worse with the current global environment going on as well, where this is being, I mean, supported in unprecedented ways by so much of the U.S. government, as well as the media propaganda sphere that surrounds the president and his support base. So
Yeah, and very, very much so. Like the U.S. is sort of trying to welcome them, trying to welcome them into NATO somehow. Like, how do you get a South American country into NATO, for one thing? And yeah, it is basically a fascist situation there because, like I said, he's nostalgic. He was involved in the 1960s, 1970s, the juntas there. And he was part of that. He was part of the military dictatorship of Brazil. And so expecting him to be anything less than utterly hideously corrupt is really expecting too much, because yeah, you lock up your legitimate opposition and you end up with some guy like this. It's a reactionary situation. You leave them with no choice but to vote for this psychopath.
But Bolsonaro pays lip service to wanting to save Brazil's European population from the brown hordes. So I mean, you have to support him if you're in these circles. It's another example of what you talked about there, where you mix things like Zionism and this real hard with these somewhat legitimate right-wing populist issues. You just mix them all together, and it just creates the worst possible recipe.
Yeah, no, he appeals to like the basest sensibilities of Americans who don't really know at all what's going on down there, but they hear, oh, he wants to save the white people. He must be good. Yay! It's like, really?
He hates socialism. He hates...
No. Yeah, he hates socialism, so he must be good. Yay! No, it's like the situation on the ground in South America is very different than the situation up here, for one thing, which is why when people start dumping on socialism in Venezuela, it's like, do you guys really know what it was like in Venezuela before Chavez came to power? Because it was probably, I think, the most unequal country on earth, I believe. I mean, it was not good. Mm-hmm. And what it is now is still not good, but it's a lot better than it was. And I don't think that many people in Venezuela would like to go back to what it was like before that. But the fact that, at least so far, it looks like Bolsonaro doesn't want to give the U.S. His country to use as a staging ground to invade Venezuela. But who knows? Maybe that's what the whole dangling NATO in front of his face was all about. Might have been like a quid pro quo. Oh, if we let you be like a friend of NATO, or like NATO in everything but name, then you'll let us invade Venezuela. But I don't know. I'm going to keep my fingers crossed that the little that we've heard about Venezuela in the last few weeks means that maybe they've given up there. But I don't know. Knock on wood. Anyway, next story. It's Kazakhstan. So basically, we've got the anointed successor of the longtime Kazakh dictator in all but name, who's been elected with a shocking 70% of the votes cast. Gosh, what a surprise. It's almost like, what did Stalin say? Doesn't matter who votes, but who counts the votes decides everything. Yeah, I'm not surprised there's a lot of people protesting, and I'm not surprised they're being cracked down on bloodily and mercilessly, because that's kind of what they do over there. I mean, this is one of those countries that Wikipedia endorsed implicitly with this happened in 2011, so it's not exactly current news, but a lot of people don't know about this. Basically, the guy who runs Wikipedia basically gave the entire Kazakh language Wikipedia over to the government to basically redesign as they saw fit, because it was like originally an open thing where people could maybe, express truths about the Kazakh government. No more. They basically replaced it with the official history of Kazakhstan as written by Nazarbayev. So that's just a little trivia there. But what do you think about this?
I'm not really too much of an expert on what's going on in Azerbaijan. I know it very much figures into whatever's going on with this whole Russian angle, but I don't feel like I'm really qualified to speak a whole lot on the matter. So,
well, anyway, so we're gonna turn the second half of the show over to you. So, go ahead.
All right, here we go. Here's Miko Palet, an excellent Jewish anti-Zionist activist, one of the best out there. His article for Mint Press News, referring to a recent David Friedman, U.S. ambassador to Israel, New York Times interview, where he basically says that the West Bank, belongs to us, and that this is yet another symbolic gesture. And I mean, not only has there been symbolic gestures pointing in this direction of the Trump administration just basically doing all this for Israel, but we've seen the actual results of it. I mean, the Trump administration has moved the embassy to Jerusalem. The Golan Heights has become belongs to Israel, according to the Trump administration. And now, I mean, I think it's just a matter of time until this peace deal of the century. I mean, there's already leaked documents that have come out about it saying that that Israel is going to just be able to build as many settlements as they want on Palestinian land and territory in exchange for some kind of, very meager by comparison economic assistance for the Palestinians to where they can basically become more modernized in exchange for basically giving up their birthright. I mean, I think this kind of appears to be the final nail in the coffin. But I mean, David Friedman's another extremist who refers to liberal opponents of his in the Jewish community as kafirs, which were basically worse than, I believe that's the term, kapos, worse than Nazis, almost like collaborators.
Yeah,
And
they were the ones in the camps the Jewish ones in the camps who were over the other inmates.
yeah, it refers to Judea and Samaria as being the rightful belonging to the Jewish people. There's no such thing as a Palestinian in the sphere of the late great Golda Meir. I say that very sarcastically. But I mean, David Friedman is perfectly emblematic of this. And once again, this is another symbolic. You just keep seeing these symbolic gestures over and over again that ultimately, I mean, this deal of the century is not going to turn out well, and people should not be fooled by the idea or the facade of some type of economic modernization in exchange for giving up the Palestinian birthright, which is what myself and my co-host Jeremy Roth Kushel are hypothesizing is going to come out of this deal of the century. So.
Yeah, I mean, I wrote an op-ed for RT a couple months ago that basically the deal of the century is deleting Palestine. They're just going to get rid of the whole thing and then, throw the Palestinians 30 pieces of silver and say, hey, be happy. You should be happy with this, because they took away all the aid. They took away the UN refugee aid that you were giving to the Palestinians through the US a couple months ago, or last year rather. And now they're going to give that back maybe, and then they're supposed to be happy and walk away. It's like, no, actually, that's not how it works. And the idea that the Palestinians are going to get any kind of fair shake from a guy, what's his name, Kushner, who had Bibi Netanyahu sleeping in his bed when he was a kid. I'm sorry, you're not going to get a fair shake from that guy. And so the idea that this deal of the century is anything but an utter ripoff. I mean, the mask is coming off, basically, because this has always been the U.S. policy, this whole let's take the West Bank and hand it to Israel. Let's take the Golan Heights. Why don't they just take Capitol Hill and hand it to Israel and be done with? Because that's what we're going for here. I mean, it's basically like putting a big sticker on the Capitol building that says property of Bibi Netanyahu. It's like, it's a joke. That's not a very funny one.
Yeah, for sure. Well, let's go on to the next slide here. All right, here's a Haaretz op-ed, and this is a very interesting one because I think this one details one of my primary, at least areas where I may have some, I don't know if there's so much disagreements or just kind of somewhat differing views in a lot in the alternative media, and that is related to what exactly is the role of Russia in all this Middle East intrigue here. And I think this article raises a lot of intriguing questions. It is behind a paywall, so I hope everybody's able to access it. But I did copy and paste the transcript of the article for the show's purposes. And in this, it raises some very legitimate questions and points about as far as what's going on with the Russian relationship with Iran, even going as far as charging that there's Russian support of groups within the Syrian army that might be hostile to Iranian influence. And basically to follow up on this article for more details on this line of thinking, I would recommend people to the writings of Andrew Karibko. He writes for, I believe, among other outlets, Sputnik. And Andrew Karibko is he's very, very supportive of Russia. He's very supportive of Russia's geopolitical aims from a Russian perspective, but he also believes that this whole idea of Vladimir Putin is this hostile opponent of Zionism and Israel is actually not true. So I would recommend his analysis as kind of a counter, just to compare what you see from that to elsewhere and kind of come to your own conclusions on that. And also Seth Abramson, he's kind of a liberal law expert journalist, but he's put together his two books on the global collusion that he thinks is going on here. One is Proof of Collusion, and the other is Proof of Conspiracy. And he lays out 6 primary actors that he believes have made the Trump administration possible, among others, Russia, Saudi Arabia, Israel, United Arab Emirates as well. And that there's a grand bargain going on in that by getting Trump elected, there would be a lifting of sanctions, international sanctions, US supported sanctions against Russia in exchange for convincing, maybe pressuring Russia, however you want to put it, to remove Iran from Syria. Now, in this month, we've got this meeting of national security Bolton of the US, the Russian equivalent to him, as well as the Israeli equivalent, meeting together. I believe it's in Jerusalem this month, and this very well could happen. So I think that this article, there's some interesting fine print details in this article that I think need to be validated. But I very much I'm becoming more and more critical of what exactly the role is of the Russians in all of this Middle East intrigue here. It might be a double game going on, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah, the problem with Seth Abramson and all of this collusion stuff is that, I mean, Russia is actually, the relationship with the US and Russia is worse than it's ever been, basically, since Russia's been an independent state. This whole idea that, oh, yeah, sanctions are going to be removed if Russia gets Trump elected. Well, oops, that kind of didn't happen. And oops, all the treaties are being dissolved. And oops, there's missiles now in Poland. They're rolling all of this military equipment into Poland now to menace Russia more. So if Russia is supposedly got Donald Trump elected, then Russia really screwed up, because they're in a very bad situation right now with the US. So
what
I
about
don't
these other
buy any of this collusion nonsense, and I think it's completely idiotic. But as far as Israel goes, yes. I mean, obviously, the whole Russian collusion thing, you just replace the word Israel into wherever they've said Russia, then yes, definitely Israel got Trump elected. I can see that in a minute. I mean, they even made it a draft social media manipulation plan that they supposedly didn't use, but I mean, you can see it. The fingerprints are everywhere.
Well, I was where you are about a year ago, and I'm still somewhat where you are now, but I do think that there is something to this global element tying in a number of varying interests together. But you know what? This would be a fascinating topic to talk more about in a future dialogue. So anyway, I would just take articles like this, take some of Andrew Karibko's stuff, read Seth Abramson stuff for yourself, and then compare it to what else we're seeing out there, and maybe
I've read
let's start a bigger conversation on this.
He doesn't have much to say, unfortunately. He just doesn't really seem to know what he's talking about. I'll read the other guy, though, Karibko.
Well, I'll agree to disagree on that, but we can, as we said, we can talk more about this in the future. It'll make for intriguing topics. So, okay, here's the national interest. And by the way, the national interest is a very interesting think tank, so to speak. Writing this article here, Russia versus Israel, the war that could become a nuclear disaster. And it's basically raising questions about what would happen if there was a serious Russian-Israeli confrontation as related to something like Syria. So, in the idea, yes, this would be epic and this would be catastrophic. And it says that, yes, relations are better than they've been in the past, but also that there is a possibility for this thing to really grasp out of control. And I think that's it's a very scary possibility. And I would encourage people to look closely into the Center for the National Interest, people who are involved with it. And it's very interesting group, to say the least. It's something that Jeremy Roth-Kushel and I have talked about in more detail on our program. But anyway, what are your thoughts on this article, Helen?
I thought it was interesting. I mean, the way that they frame it, though, is that, oh, well, you know, Israel is just defending itself and all of this. Oh, they just don't want Iran on their borders and stuff. Israel hasn't defended itself since, like, the dawn of time. Israel is always the aggressor. Iran hasn't invaded anybody in over a century, and Russia is not aggressive either. They want to keep Syria in a functioning state because they want the warm water port. Okay, but that's defensive. That's not offensive. This, I mean, the way that he framed it, I thought was very inaccurate, but the content of the article was interesting. Yes, as far as the alliances and stuff. I mean, yeah, there is definitely evidence that Russia is not willing to back Iran if it should come to a conflict, which is not good for Iran. I mean, I don't know what their game is, because if Iran is knocked out, I mean, what do they think is going to come in to fill the void? It's going to be more of a US-backed terrorist state, presumably, or, I mean, I don't know what they think is going to end up there, but it's not going to be better than what came before, I don't think. I mean, it's not like some democratic oasis wonderland is going to spring up like the US is always saying is going to happen. It's going to be a bunch of, like, feuding. It's going to be a disaster.
It'll be the polar opposite of that, yes.
Yeah, and the fact that Russia has just basically been extremely forgiving of Israeli aggression. I mean, when they shot down that plane, well, when Israel, like, basically they describe it better in this article than I'm going to, but basically they spoofed a plane, and then Syria goes and shoots down the plane, and whatever actually happened there, Russia was very forgiving of Israel, shall we say. I mean, yes, they gave Syria the missile batteries, but still, like, they didn't retaliate, and that's because they don't want a nuclear war. Now, who does want a nuclear war? Well, that would be Israel and the United States. More United States than Israel. I don't think that Israel wants a nuclear war because they realize it would wipe them off the face of the earth. But they're more into that than the other countries are. So,
options for too,
the only reason that Israel is the U.S.'s best friend is because Israel makes us look sane. That's the only reason. Well, one of many reasons, but yeah. Anyway,
I guess to wrap this topic up here before we move on, I would say that the questions surrounding what you just raised there regarding, you know, Russia, Syria, Israel, Iran axis here, I think is key to maybe getting to a lot of what might be going on in terms of the bigger kind of global geopolitical picture that's going on with the Trump administration and its bigger foreign policy and global aims. So hopefully we can have more of a conversation about that as this trilateral summit comes up here with these leaders, and we'll see if this stuff does play out. If there is any type of heavy-handed push to get Iran out of the region, we'll see what happens. Okay, next story. Oh, this is a big one here. This is a crucial article right here by Whitney Webb, who's doing really excellent work at Mint Press News, to the point to where she's even insinuating that there may be prominent progressive left-minded people that are you might be involved in a campaign to slander her based on her work here. And this is an article on key obviously U.S. Israeli partisan neocon Paul Singer and the outsourcing of U.S. tech jobs to Israel. This is key stuff going on here, and there have been key movements made in this arena in recent months. My co-host Jeremy Rothkishel and I, we were in Des Moines and Cedar Rapids, Iowa this past weekend, handing out literature and flyers about this very topic of outsourcing and basically selling out of U.S. national security, high technology to the Israelis. There's even a somewhat of a possibly Russian Chinese role in this as well. And so this article right here is a key one for people to understand, because this is much, much, much bigger than anybody can really fathom. This is a very multifaceted situation going on here. And Paul Singer's role in this is key to understand in this complete selling out of our policy, of the most important technology, and that so much of this does relate to national security and our most important interest as a country as far as protecting our security. And it's going into the hands of a foreign state thanks to people like these if he's not a dual citizen, then he's certainly a dual operative who is acting on the interest of the state of Israel, Paul Singer, and many, many other people as well. But Paul Singer happens to be the person who is being profiled in this particular article.
Yeah, I had no idea how central he was to the whole thing. And like you said, Whitney Webb's reporting is just amazing. Nobody else is doing stuff like this, and it's really, really important that she is. So I'm not surprised they're trying to take her out. But yeah, this is an extremely disturbing story, because like all of these tech companies, the ones that are handling our technology for our military, for everything that is like our core telecommunications, our computer processors, is all being moved to Israel. And as they say in here, that this is the country that is spying on us more than anybody else. They're, of course, number one of our allies that's spying on us, and they said number 3 behind Russia and China as far as having the largest intelligence operations. But they're definitely, I mean, they are a threat. And the fact that we are just feeding all of our what we need to function as a country straight into their mouth and saying, oh, you know, don't use this the wrong way. I mean, you know, you're basically giving a loaded gun to somebody and telling them to point it at your head and pull the trigger. It's insane. Yeah. And so this is very dangerous. The fact that Microsoft and Intel, of course, I mean, we know now that all computers made after 2006 have this vulnerability in the chip that basically allows anybody, generally in Israel, to get in there and take over. So what do you do with that? They say, oh, we have a patch. Well, you can't patch hardware with software, guys. I'm sorry, I hate to break it to you, but as much as we would like to believe you can, it's like and then they buy up the other chip makers, and AMD has got the same problem. And so what do? You basically, you have no security anymore because they own all the security. It's very scary.
Yeah. And from a long-term perspective, this is a continuation of what was going on in the Reagan years with people like with the Promise software program. People, obviously, a lot of what was at the center of the Jonathan Pollard scandal, as well as people like the infamous billionaire tycoon Robert Maxwell and the things he was doing. So there's a lot of ways this is a continuation of something that has been very long-term, rooting out of the Henry Scoop Jackson, Richard Pearl network of neocons that first came to prominence in the 70s and really kind of in a lot of ways effectively took over so much in the 80s during the Reagan administration. And now they are rising back to prominence, the levels that they haven't been to since that time period, and possibly even more prominent than ever. Thanks once again to our would-be anti-Zionist hero, Donald Trump. So
Yeah, no, and it's just
so
they once they have this complete death grip over the technology, there's really no way to get out of that because they run everything as far as technologically speaking, and you can't have the internet now unless you route it through Israeli equipment. They
right.
really have a lockdown on that, and that's terrifying.
Yeah, let's follow what's going on with the Microsoft cloud program and the people who have taken over that in terms of the Pentagon angle in that. I mean, it's very critical information to have. So anyway, we'll certainly be talking more about this topic on programs like this in the near future. So anyway, I guess we'll move on here. Should probably start moving a little faster. It's just get into these topics. It's so much fun. Now, this is just a sad one here of the homeless population in Los Angeles just continues to rise dramatically. I mean, this is, this is on one hand, people know about this, but on another hand, I don't know if people know, including myself, understand the depths of just how much people are suffering, particularly in the inner cities in this country. So this is just another microcosm of something I think that is much bigger in scope. But I mean, now you have people, and I don't know, the Guardian may actually at some level have people who might, for all of its flaws, might at some level actually, want to actually raise attention to these stories. But as usual, our politicians like the mayor of Los Angeles, oh, they're raising all of this fuss about it. Oh, this is so horrible. We're going to do something about it. When in reality, nothing ever seems to change on the ground for these people.
No, because there's no money in building homes for homeless people. That's always the problem. The homeless lobby does not actually have a lobby because they're homeless. They don't have a pot to piss in. So it's really, I mean, there's the same problem. I live in New York, and we have the same problem here. It's homelessness is at record highs because they've built a city for rich people, and there just aren't any rich people anymore because our economy is in the toilet. For all that Donald Trump says that, oh, our economy is doing so great. Yeah, our economy is doing so great if you're the top 0.01% of people. If you're anybody else, you're kind of screwed because there's no, I mean, yeah, you could probably find a job, but it's going to be a job in the gig economy where you're making like either minimum wage or close to it, no benefits, no nothing, and no job security. So it's very easy to end up on the street. And this is a really, really horrifying situation because once you're in one of these tents or something, it's very difficult to get back out. You can't put together good credit. You can't put together like to rent a house or anything. You don't have, there's no way to rebuild yourself. They don't, I mean, yeah, there are, I guess, charities and stuff that will try to help you do that. But if you're just scrambling to stay, to keep yourself together, it's very difficult to get back out of this situation. So, I mean, this is very unfortunate.
And of course, we've got a large sector of the population that are very much very much the people like the ones we profiled in that earlier New York Times article, the ones that want to blame people like this as your enemy and say that this is who you should be mad at. And I mean, it's absurd when you think about the face of the actual lifestyle that these people who a lot of people would want you to believe is who you should look at as your enemy, just how they're actually living. So
they say, oh, they're all drug addicts, so they all did this to
right.
themselves or whatever. And it's like, no, actually, they are all probably people who got foreclosed from their homes in 2008. I mean, a lot of them are people who got kicked out of their houses in the crash. And it's a little difficult to get back on your feet when you lose like all of your possessions and all of your stuff. And it's very, I mean, I have a lot of pity for these people, and I wish that there was more that the average person could do. But unfortunately, the average person doesn't have much of a pot to piss in either.
Exactly.
I mean, the whole statistic about 2/3 of us don't have $600 in case of an emergency. That's like, I think a lot of people wish that they could help the homeless, but because they can't, they feel bad. And so they kind of like ignore the problem or whatever. I mean, I don't know what the answer is, but I think that forcing people who are building these luxury buildings to at least insert some affordable housing units is a start.
Yeah, and a lot of these people, they won't really think about it until it really hits them in the pocketbook. So
Yep.
anyway, okay, let's go here. Oh, here we go. This was the 52nd anniversary of the attack on the USS Liberty. And I'd just say for anybody who looks into this more and more, it becomes blatantly obvious what happened on June 8th, 1967, and the obvious treachery of that. I don't think we have to rehash the details of the USS Liberty too much for the people who are watching this particular program. But I would just say that the evidence and the obvious reality of what happened there is becomes just more and more and more obvious that any neutral observer who doesn't have a vested interest in trying to cover up the truth has to admit that at the very least this was at the very least Israel did this, and at the very worst that this was deliberately done. And I think the facts and the what's out there undoubtedly proves this beyond any shadow of a doubt 52 years later. But it's amazing. I'm glad that people are still out there talking about this, but still, this is one of those incidences of history that's not nearly enough people understand. And this is something that needs to be known in the context of this current event that's going on with Iran being accused of attacking these boats in Oman. So, I mean, this is once again, I mean, what was USS Liberty designed to do? Blame Egypt so that the U.S. would join Israel's 1967 war against its enemy. And now the same way, it's like history repeating itself here. That's what I can say. But it's so obvious what happened, and people need to understand this.
Yeah, the fact that they're talking about new evidence is like, do we really even need new evidence? I mean, the evidence is so like mountains of evidence already. We know that this happened on purpose. There's no way that this could have been an accident. I mean, if you listen, any of the, I mean, there was an interview on some YouTube channel, I think True News had, with some of the survivors, and it was just like so obvious that yeah, there was a giant American flag there, and they radioed to them, and that they had blocked the radio channels, and they dropped them like an orange peel or something. Like it was so they just wanted the ship to go to the bottom, otherwise that people were going to tell tales, and people told tales because yeah, this was
Johnson was quoted as saying, "Send it to the bottom," wasn't he?
Yeah, he said, "I'm not going to embarrass our allies over a few
Right.
dead sailors," which is like, okay, so anybody who's walking around saying that Johnson is like a hero or something, like, can you please just die, just kill yourself, please?
There's also a contingent that blames Johnson for the Kennedy assassination while leaving out the country that he served as almost a primary benefactor for. So there
he
you
certainly
go.
was a primary benefactor. I mean, I haven't researched,
but I mean, as far as
involved, but
country that seemed to benefit the most from Kennedy's assassination and Johnson coming to power, that being Israel. Those people don't want to talk about that. So
nope.
And then we've got one more article on the USS Liberty here that will be our next one, and this is I'm glad that this is. Oh, wait, now actually, it's not the USS Liberty. It's something that could be directly or indirectly related from a historical perspective, and that is I believe this is the story on James Forrestal, correct?
Yeah.
That's the next slide here. I'm not getting the slide, but it's DC Dave Martin has come out with here we go. We've got this story first here about Tiananmen Square and the legacy of Mao. I'll let you comment on this one, Helen, if you have any quick comments to make on it.
I don't really have much to say. I mean, we're kind of running out of time here, but basically that Mao's legacy is integral to the functioning of the Chinese state as it is now. And yeah, it is. It's very much a centralized authoritarian, like, I mean, and not even exclusively authoritarian in a negative sense, just that it's very much dependent on one central power holding the whole thing together. Otherwise, China would have splintered into who knows how many things by now. I'm not weighing in on whether that's a good or a bad thing. I think that it's probably very oppressive for many of the people who live there, who would prefer that things were done differently. But I mean, it's for better or worse, that's what it is, and his legacy is very much still felt today.
For sure, and for better or for worse. Here's the story I was talking about here. This is DC Dave Martin, and he runs an excellent website where DC Dave has written up some really good write-ups, among other things, on the history of the Vince Foster case, among other things. And now he has, I guess he's come out with a book on the, this is a long-awaited, I guess, long worked on volume that he's been working on the assassination of Defense Secretary James Forrestal. And this is something that, I think, is going to be an excellent source for people to have, is the assassination of Forrestal went on at a very critical time in U.S. history, namely 1 year after the establishment of the State of Israel, which many in the U.S. National security establishment were actually opposed to, put Forrestal on that list. And with the bigger picture of the kind of machinations that went into President Truman's recognition of the State of Israel and the bigger events surrounding that, James Forrestal was a primary opponent of the the U.S. recognition of Israel, knowing that it would be a powder keg and it would create huge problems in the future. And the establishment narrative about Forrestal's death, basically the guy went crazy and fell out of a window or basically jumped out of a window, whatever you want to believe. So I'm glad that Dave Martin, who's done some great investigative work on a number of topics over the years, is now getting into this. So this will be something that certainly would be recommended to people. And so anyway, this is a crucial time in history here with the events that took place just before the likely assassination of James Forrestal, which was labeled a suicide by a man who'd gone crazy. And so this, I think, is important, and I highly welcome this from Dave Martin. Everything I've seen from him is excellent. So.
Yeah, it was an interesting story. I wasn't aware of the situation, but from reading, I mean, he's being held in isolation, not allowed to see his family, and then finally he gets a chance to see his family, and then whoops, he suddenly jumps out a window the night before. Okay, I'm gonna call something might be a little suspicious there.
For sure. And the bigger nature of all the events that were going on for us, the opposition to the establishment of the state of Israel. I mean, it just it was a very convenient event at the very least. So I'm interested.
Oh yeah, a lot of people came down with the whole Tel Aviv flu, which was extremely fatal, and I mean, it just seems funny. Everybody who opposes the establishment of the state of Israel, which was mostly founded by terrorists, it's like
Right.
you wonder if these acts of terror happen to befall their enemies. It's funny how that works.
Right, Truman and his $1 million suitcase whistle stop, all that good stuff. So
Yep.
anyway, we're gonna move on to our last few stories here, and this is going to directly relate to our next couple of stories here. But Fox News Tucker Carlson claims George Soros is remaking America, and just like everything, there's an element of truth here. But the way that Tucker Carlson is going about this is this kind of this right-wing depiction of George Soros as this boogeyman who is to blame for everything from if I stub my toe in the morning, it's the fault of George Soros. And there's legitimate critiques of Soros, of course, his funding of these various events which have led to the manufactured migration crisis, things of that nature. But I mean, so much of this criticism is done in a specific way that's designed to make a boogeyman out of this. And he very much is, and it's going to relate to our next couple of stories here with the prime minister's son, Yair Netanyahu, visiting America, and his voyage to the U.S., which included meetings among other people, Tucker Carlson, among others. So did you want to comment on that before we get to this story?
Yeah, no, just said like I agree with what you said, that holding up as the boogeyman is counterproductive, and it really distracts from the point of the thing, which is it's more what Soros is doing than Soros like being
Right.
the be all and end all of the evil billionaire behind this. For one thing, there's a lot of billionaires behind the scenes manipulating the world. It's not Soros as the one guy. So yeah, he's distracting from the issues.
And there's a really good article from all places I know, of all places, BuzzFeed, quote unquote, news, had a really good detailed article on on a lot of the creation of this Soros narrative, how it came out of the group people such as Arthur Finkelstein and the network of Zionist operatives that have surrounded him in the U.S. and within the Fox News sphere as well. So in a way, Tucker is kind of advancing that agenda. And so I guess we will move on now to this story, and then we'll kind of get back into this bigger topic when we talk about Netanyahu. But here's one here, and this I had similar about Ilhan Omar joining a new Black Jewish congressional caucus. And when I read the details of the article, I was thinking about what you said earlier about Jeremy Corbyn apologizing for things that he wasn't even truly guilty of, for having an opinion. It was quite frankly correct. And now Ilhan Omar is joining this Black Jewish congressional caucus with the likes of Debbie Wasserman Schultz, who's very much the Democratic establishment face of the Israel First contingent here in the U.S., as well as rabid Zionist New York Congressman Lee Zeldin, who's one of, I believe, 2 Jewish Republicans in all of Congress. This guy's a rabid Zionist supporter of the Zionist Organization of America. For Ilhan Omar to be getting into even an ostensible alliance with the likes of these people, I think is very troubling, and I don't see it as a good sign. I think she needs to hold her ground rather than even symbolically appearing in some type of form of quote unquote solidarity with people like this, just to maybe downplay the idea that she's somehow a Jew hater because she criticizes Israel.
Yeah, I mean, she doesn't have the experience that these people do, and they're going to walk all over her if she's not careful. I mean, she's smart, but I don't know if she's that smart. And like I said, she's doesn't have the experience. These people will like shred her if she's not careful. So I hope she's careful. That's all. I mean, because Debbie Wasserman Schultz is the scum of the earth. I mean, they don't make them much worse than her. She's really, really terrible. And Zeldin is pretty terrible too, but I think Wasserman Schultz is actually worse. Just because she stole the election. She stole her election in Florida. She engineered the stealing of the election for Hillary. She's just a total slime ball. I mean, ew.
Yeah, but either way, I mean, those two, it's like, oh my God,
yeah, you can't win. You can't win.
People in that. So, all right, now I think we're ready to get into the. Here we go. Yair Netanyahu, the son of the Israeli leader, calls Trump a real rock star and compares him to King Cyrus. This was during an interview with The Blaze, Glenn Beck's media outlet. This was during a tour of the U.S. where Netanyahu met, among other people, Katrina Pearson, who I believe was one of Trump's communications directors in 2016, as well as the aforementioned Tucker Carlson. And for all the people who still think that Trump is somehow not a super Zionist. I mean, this is the prime minister's own son. What more proof do you need? You don't think the prime minister's son represents what his father actually believes about this man? I mean, come on now. I mean, how many more do we have to see before we bring it, before it becomes obvious? And one thing about Yair Netanyahu is that in the spirit of what Tucker, who he was photographed with and described as a great friend of Israel on his Twitter feed, one thing Yair Netanyahu did was he made this depiction of George Soros as this boogeyman that was pulling the strings of Netanyahu's enemies. So here you can see where this here you can very much see where the Israeli right-wing hawks in Israel very much have a vested interest in also portraying George Soros as this boogeyman. But what about this Yair Netanyahu rock star tour of the U.S. where he's touting the greatness of our President Trump? And here's another follow-up article on it from Haaretz, Yair Netanyahu's very Trumpy tour of Washington.
I think it's very telling that he lives with his parents, that he's never held a job, that all he seems to do is run around and basically act like a spoiled rich brat. I mean, he's an embarrassment to a country that doesn't need any more embarrassments.
Yeah, they're afraid of him. They disown him because he's so, but I mean, at the same time, though, he
repugnant sociopath. I mean, he really is his father's son. It's what do you expect from a country that produces a Benjamin Netanyahu that then produces this Yair Netanyahu, was basically like, he really is a distillation of all the things that are repulsive about his father, and all the things that are repulsive about. I mean, he's really is the like human embodiment of Israel. I mean, he's entitled. He's just very smug. He acts like the whole world belongs to him. He doesn't feel like he needs to do anything like useful in the world. He just really walks around like he owns the place, and I mean, that's probably why Israel doesn't want him running around, because he shows them for what they are. But yeah, no, I mean, he serves a purpose for sure in like, posting things like this George Soros meme. And like his dad, he's willing to confer upon these far right constructs or people, absolve them from the anti-Semitism thing that they're always tarred with. Like I think Netanyahu was doing like the whole tour of Eastern Europe, like laying on of hands to all these right-wing leaders and being like, "You're not anti-Semitic because I approve of you," and stuff. And like, and other Jewish leaders were like, "Dude, what are you doing? Like, stop that."
Netanyahu and Viktor Orban of Hungary, they were working together to denounce Soros and all of that. And so it's a very fascinating, a very dangerous kind of meeting of the quote unquote intellectual minds in this right wing quote unquote populist movement that's very much Zionist inspired. And one last thing about Yair Netanyahu is that I think this is the icing on the cake for him. The #1 boogeyman neo-Nazi website in the U.S., the Daily Stormer, proclaimed him to be a based champion, that he's like them. They like him because he made a meme about George Soros. So, I mean, there's some very strange bed making going on here in this whole thing. And I think this visit to the U.S. is very instructive of a bigger perspective of what's going on here. But once again, if it's the prime minister's son, what more do you need to know, guys?
Yeah, and I mean the whole like the Daily Stormer thing. I mean, that the whole existence of the Daily Stormer is meant to like just smear all critics of Israel or all critics of Zionist power as being like neo-Nazi, whatever. Exactly. And so of course they're going to embrace Yair Netanyahu because he's part of that whole same thing. This like psyop, this trying to tar everybody with the same brush, that anybody who might think that maybe we shouldn't have these psychotic Zionist scumbags running the world, that maybe that's a bad thing. Then of course you get smeared with, oh yeah, you must be in with those neo-Nazis, those Daily Stormers. So of course, yeah, they did this whole theatrical like thing. There's like 5 of them in the world.
Yeah. And people who say that, people who push these talking points and they get all this media attention, very conveniently so, it turns people off from wanting to look into this information.
Yep, very much so.
That's the goal. So anyway, are there any more stories, or are we finished here?
There's one story, but it's terrible, and I don't really want to. That was really one of the worst things that I've read in the recent past.
Well, this was
an embarrassing mess of a disaster.
You mean the truth of it, or the fact that it's so true, or?
No, the fact that this guy doesn't really know what he's talking about.
Well, I liked much of the article.
Okay, well, we're gonna have to agree to disagree then, because
I mean, there's some unfair generalizations in there, but I think the stuff about Trump himself, the qualities that he's putting on Trump, are pretty true.
Yeah, the whole like comparing Trump to Hitler thing has been done so many times, and there are not enough. I mean, it just doesn't. For one thing, the idea that Trump is anti-Semitic. Okay, well, where did you hear that? Because I don't see that at all. Trump's daughter is married to a Jewish man. Trump has given away as much as he possibly can to Israel. If he could give away more, he would. Like I said, if he could stick this property of Israel sticker on the Capitol Hill, he would do so. This is a totally bogus article. I
think it's coming from the perspective of like the left-wing Jewish types who might genuinely do think that Trump hates Jews because of his rhetoric towards certain liberal causes and things like that. But I mean, I personally found a lot more to agree on in this article than you did. So I mean, but either way, I think it's a case study into Trump's personality. Maybe if some of the things that you didn't like were taken out of the article, I think it's a pretty good case study into his personality and what he represents.
I think the whole idea of psychoanalyzing Trump and using that as a disqualifier of him is extremely dangerous, because there's a reason we have this Goldwater rule, and there's a whole like group of psychiatrists that is trying to get together a town hall with the entire House, but mostly with Democrats, to basically call attention to the clear and present danger of Trump's dangerous psychological state. Now, they're saying that he's stupid. Now, I can say a lot of bad things about Trump. I don't think he's stupid. If he was stupid, he would have gotten railroaded out of office a long time ago. Is he arrogant? Does he have a lot of narcissism, a lot of really negative psychological traits? Yes. Stupid? No. I disagree with that completely.
I do think those qualities, though, can lead to him. He has this mentality of listening to the last person in the room, the last person who praises him. So I do think that has.
I can agree with that.
I think all these qualities are true, but I also think that there is a quality of Trump that he is somewhat unpredictable, which means that certain people may not know what he's going to do. And he may be prone to actually turn on people who have brought him to certain places. So I think there's also an element of unpredictability with Trump. I would analyze him somewhat a little differently from maybe a quote unquote psychoanalytical perspective, but I do think it's somewhat worth doing. And I think that there is, he's obviously a egomaniac and all of this stuff. And I think that that's, in a way, a lot of ways, it's done to manage him in some ways. So,
yeah, I mean, you could say that about any president, though, and also the fact that he's unpredictable. I mean, that isn't. I mean, the reason why people don't like that is because he's difficult to control. I mean, that obviously they want to control him. That was the whole reason why they didn't want him in office in the first place, is because they didn't really see where they could get their hooks in there, and so it's like. Yeah, I would say that that's almost a benefit, is that he's difficult to control. So you're only working with one narcissistic egomaniac. Well, that's redundant. Never mind. One raging narcissist there instead of a whole cabinet full of raging narcissists. While yes, you do have a cabinet full of raging narcissists. You've got Pompeo and Bolton and all of these other idiots. I don't think Trump is stupid at all, and I think that I just wish that he was on our side.
Right, for sure. But I think that's gone out the window, unfortunately.
Oh, no, he's definitely not.
And speaking of out the window, I believe this wraps up our time for this week's show. Helen, thank you. This has been very enjoyable, and hopefully we can do it again in the future. And hopefully we can have more conversations about some of these topics that we maybe agree to disagree on a little bit. But it's been a lot of fun, and I've enjoyed doing this.
Indeed. So yes, I'll see you another time, and
sure.
Subscribe, like, follow, share. Meme. Yes, definitely we'll do.
APAC, man, I love that.
Yes. All right. Goodbye.
Or not
everybody.
The Pompeo meme, the APAC meme. Please send that. Thank you.
I'll send the Pompeo one when I make it too.
For sure. Thank you so much. All right. Thanks, Alan.
Bye, everybody.
Goodbye.